Hi, my name's Chris Summer, and this is a painting of an urchin that I'm currently about halfway through. And I'm starting a new section, so I'm kind of going to show you how I work on that section. The plan is to show all of the layers, but we'll see how we go. So this half of the urchin is finished. I always work left to right and top to bottom, because sometimes I can be messy, even though my paintings don't look like it. And so if I'm leaning and have paint on my hand, or if some paint drips, I want to make sure that I'm not dripping on anything that's finished. So I'd finish the top part and then work down, so I'm never working above an area that's finished. So this is the base layer. So I usually do about 4 or 5 layers. This is the base layer here. So this is just one layer of paint and it's just blocked in. It's real crude. The tones don't even match at the moment really of what I want them to be. They're just there to preserve the sketch and to get a general idea of what the tones will be. So now I'm going to do the second layer, and that's going to we're going to get those tones a bit more accurate and soften up some of those edges, soften up the edges where they need to be soft, and keep the structure and form where we need to. So I've got my reference here. This is my own photography that I take, and this is a compilation of sort of 3 or 4 images to adjust focal length and lighting and such, and I've put it together in Photoshop. So at the moment we are working on this, as long as I don't break it, we're going to work on this middle section here. I've got a 0 and a 000. They're both older brushes, so they're a bit frayed. I like to do that unless I'm doing sharp lines. So pretty much I'm going to be using the 0, I think, except for maybe where I come to piece in some of those holes. I've got the smaller one. In my hand I've got water cups here. I've got a spray to keep the acrylic wet. I keep 2 water jars, one to do the main clean and then one to rinse so the brush is clean. I've got my tea towel here, and this is where I have my other brushes which I won't be using at the moment, and this table is my floating table. All right, let's get into it. So in this layer, I am not precious at all. I think people think, because of the way my work looks, that I am precious, and I guess I am a bit more over the last layer, if it's a detailed layer. But I know I'm going to do another couple of layers over this. And so this really is just, you know, just fine tuning that form. But also really, like, I don't want to spend forever here. Like, my works already take however long they take, you know, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Some works have taken 6 weeks. 2 months, I reckon the longest one was, although I probably had a bit of a break in there somewhere. So we're just focusing on the tone of each section, putting in rough shape. And really what it's about is building up layers, because in a realism painting like this, which is one of the reasons that I'm not taking too much care, because actually the purpose really is just to get paint down. You see the paint through the layers, and that creates the illusion of complexity. Well, the complexity's there, but that complexity helps create the illusion of photography. But that really is the thing between, I mean, especially with acrylics, you can't get those soft blends without it, but it really is the difference between having a detailed work which is photorealistic, even when it's not that fine, you know, or a work which is technically very proficient, but it still looks like a highly detailed drawing. And often the only difference between the two is how many layers of paint there are underneath, because when you mix your paint with a glazing medium, the paints show through and the light bounces through those layers, and you get this beautiful intricacy that you just can't mimic with one layer of paint. But also what it is for me here is there are a lot of, where I've blocked in, there are a lot of white spots where I've been maintaining the integrity of my sketch. I always sketch out first, because that is just how I am better at mapping out a work, getting the dimensions and the form right. So this layer, I want to make sure there is no white on the canvas left. Now I'm happy to overlap those edges. Don't mind overlapping those edges at all. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to skip forward a little bit, and I'll show you what this layer looks like once I get to the end. So it's actually the next morning. I didn't quite get this finished yesterday, so I've just been working on the last little bit, and so here we are now. I've just got this the edge pretty much to do, so I've done the second layer of tones over the underpainting, and obviously we've got that transition of light, so you can see that I've really been conscious of getting those tones down to just mute highlights, bring in those extra darks, so that when we've got the detail, we've really got the transition of light underneath. Often when you're painting detail, it can be really easy to, you know, when you're focused on tiny marks, it's really hard to get that transition of shadow through those fine details, and your work can look flat. So I'm just going to do this bottom edge. Where am I? I don't fine up the background to its finished point until the painting is finished, but what I actually do is put a protective strip around. So what I'm going to do now is just tidy up this background tone along this edge. This will give me the opportunity just to soften that line that I've just created, although because I'm using my sort of blocking brush, and I can just get a dry brush and go along the edge. It's already pretty soft, and it is the harder edge out of the Urchin, so it doesn't need too much work. But I'll create that sort of strip of background that'll just protect the Urchin, so that when I come with a large brush to block in the background, I'm not at risk of painting over all my really hard work. So this is kind of another layer of just putting paint down, really, but paying more attention to the detail. So my reference is just up here, so I can see my reference. So what I'm going to do is kind of work this section here. So when I come to layer 3 and 4, I really hone into the detail in that area and the light in that area, and which paints are which. So I don't cover as much big an area with layer 3. I won't do the whole thing, because then I can keep in my mind what tones I was using and that transition as we go layer to layer, because obviously as we come down, like over here, this is still going to be quite bright, the light is coming down, but as you get to this row here, that really drops a tone, and then it drops a tone further, and so, you know, this will be even, like it won't just be a shift in one of my tones. I only have 12 tones, and one of those is absolute black, which I'm not even using at the moment, although I might have to mix that soon in this spot. And absolute white I might not even be using by the time we get down here. So in terms of 10 tones, that's a bit too much of a shift. So to create some of those tones, I'll do a tone 4 with 2 tone 3s over the top is going to be different to 2 tone 4s with 1 tone 3 over the top. And so, you know, when you're trying to remember those levels and quite how you built that up, it's good not to move too far down the thing, because my memory can only take so much. Anyway, let's start putting some paint down. And one of the things I'm doing in this tone is just making sure that I am lifting tone where I want to lift tone, because those lights really do take a few layers to really get that vibrancy. So I definitely try and make sure that the paint goes down nice and thick there, but then I had it. And you can see here I'm still really correcting tones. Like this is quite a change. And as you get those different layers, that's creating complexity in the tones, and that's what's helping sort of create the illusion of it looking a bit like a photo. So we'll do the shadows around these. And one of the things that I like to do in this layer with the Urchin, I don't know if it would help whatever subject you paint, but because it's has a sandy texture, to it, it's really good to just be quite sporadic with the brush, because it really helps in the next layer as you put in that final detail down to help, you know, create that illusion. Helps me work quite quick too. The other thing with working quickly is that, you know, it gives me the opportunity to wet blend. Alright, so I've finished that third layer and I've let it dry for about 10 minutes. Still a bit wet where I've put it on thicker, but it should be fine. Alright, so generally this is the kind of the finer brushes that I use. I've got the 000, the 50, the 10-0. So I use the bigger, softer brushes, obviously, which I was using to block in. These are kind of my finishing brushes, which they're actually quite cheap, because then I can just replace them regularly to keep them nice and sharp. I generally don't buy expensive brushes, because I'd much rather have a nice new brush regularly. And so I'm going to shift. So the layers above this I was doing with the 5-0. The layer above that, or not the layer above that, but the position above that, I was doing with the 5-0, and above that again, where it's starting to go out of focus, the 000. So I'll shift the brush down to a sharp brush as I come down into focus, and this really now is the middle of the painting. So the main focus are the 10-0. I do have a 20-0 brush, but I really I just use that for my feathers, really, because that I can create the fine lines, but the 20-0 is so thin that it's really hard to put any decent paint on it and actually get some fill in, and it's just a bit too slow, really, because I don't like I don't want to labour too much. So what I'm going to do in tackling this area is, I think I'm going to do the 3 big. I'll usually just work the area, but I'm going to do the 3 big bumps first, so that I can get my eye in on the bumps, get the tone. You know, that this one will be slightly darker than that one. I can get my eye in, and then I'll work these complicated bits with the holes in and the little bumpy bits. Then I'll do the small bumps, and then I'll fill in between. And the thing is, I still want this to be quite bright, so I'm going to use quite a lot of. In fact, I don't even know if these large ones need this 10-0. I'm going to go back to the 5-0, because I don't think mostly they need it. I might do a layer over. That's a bit better. So you've got this sandy texture, so I'm just going to, you know, same as before, but we're using the tones underneath to, you know, now that we've got tones right, we can just focus on the detail. We don't have to worry about the tone. So this is the bright white, which, you know, obviously, because it's mixed with a medium, it's not going to be, by the time it dries and starts to show through the layers underneath, it's really not going to be as bright as a full white. I'd need to layer it quite a lot for that. And so we're being conscious of how the light comes around the subject, but also then what happens is, and shifting down tone. So this was white, this was just off, and this is the next one, shifting down tones as we come around, so that we can get that gradual thing. But also what happens, paying attention to the subject, is that even though the light is creeping around here, shadow starts to appear in the texture. And where I did the dark bits, I just want to soften that up. It looks a bit much. So with my realism, because I paint nature, I don't ever want it to be too sharp. You know, they're not man-made objects, and it just doesn't look. It looks too much if it's too sharp. So I don't ever want my work to be too sharp. So, you know, as as I'm putting paint down, I'm always looking to make sure it feels softer. Has that soft feel to it. Because it just is more, it's much more pleasing to look at. It's not stark. And so the thing is with realism is that often, or with hyperrealism, is often people do them on really large canvases. And what happens when you do work on a large canvas is it forces people to step back, to look at it and take the whole thing in. And that's great, because that's exactly what you want. If you want to look hyper-realistic, forcing people to stand back from it so that they can't see the brush marks and the texture is a great way to, you know, increase the illusion of realism. That's kind of that, and then take a nice big bit of white and put that on nice and thick, follow a bit of form, and that is that one. But I don't do that. My work draws you in. I don't want to push people away from my work. I don't want to force people to stand back from it. One of the things that I try and create in my work is an emotional connection through beauty, I guess, and you know, if people are standing back from the work, that's a lot harder to create that emotional connection. All right, so in the closing stages of this section now, so all four of the sections with the holes are done, and you can see that obviously the ones on the right are very much muted in the highlights, because the light is no longer, the brightest light is no longer coming around that curve. The four main bumps are done, and I filled in all the smaller bumps and the two large holes and this infill in between. So just got to come down the middle, and this is kind of the easier bit, because you know, the form doesn't have to be quite as rigid, or you can get away with it not being quite as rigid as with the, you know, the bumps. You know, their curve obviously, you know, has a very specific way that light falls on it. And you know, the transition of light is, you know, important from one to the other. But this dynamic here of this sort of infill is very much, or for me, how I treat it, is the sort of the most loose part. Just paying attention to this. The only form we've got here really is this this S line down the middle, which is starting here. So just picking up some highlights along that line and making sure that we're consistently picking up the detail, so that it, you know, so it does register as a feature once, you know, once the work's finished. Alright, so we're pretty much there. That was a bit bright, so I'm just going to pick up a darker tone and dull it down. And just really emphasise the blacks in here. You know, the blacks, same as the whites, I really, you know, they need a bit of layer to get that punch and just start to extend a bit. I haven't worked on this yet, so I'm just going to extend some detail in there. And I might even, is that absolute black? I might even put absolute black in there. Just a big blob of absolute black. Because I think I'll need it further down, so I just want to start introducing it as a tone so that, you know, so that it has a bit of story in the work. Alright, and how are we surrounding this? So that's up there, that's up there. And this actually comes around and just sort of surrounds this one. Like that. And that's kind of that section done. I don't know how long that took, but it was a few hours.